This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
In 1920, nearly 1 million black farmers were working across the United States. By the end of the century, that number had declined to less than 18,000. And while those figures are similar to the decline of farming nationwide, the documentary Homecoming highlights the factors that led to the decline of black farmers and sheds a spotlight on institutionalized racism that stripped many African Americans of their farmland. Hi, I'm Dee Dee Sharp, and welcome to this special edition of The Aware Show. We're glad to have you there. Our guest is an award-winning filmmaker, national PBS producer, and an administrator and professor at Ohio State University. Tonight, our Aware Profile guest is Charlene Gilbert, producer and director of the extraordinary documentary Homecoming. Sometimes I'm haunted by memories of red dirt and clay. Charlene, thank you for being here for the Aware Show.
I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here. Congratulations on your award, on your filmmaking of this documentary. Extraordinary. I hope our viewers will get a chance to see it at one point, even if you have to go online and check it out. It was exactly as we're saying, it was extraordinary.
Thank you.
I want to get started with a little bit about, I kind of tried to set it up in the opening of the show, but I kind of want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the film and why you decided to do this.
So the documentary is really about the history of land loss for African-American farmers in the South, and I use a couple of different strategies in the telling of the story. I use a sort of traditional historical documentary approach with experts and a lot of archival imagery and facts and figures, but I also wove in the story of my family because my grandfather was a farmer, my cousin at the time I made the film was the youngest farmer in Macon County, Georgia. And I took those various storylines and wove them together. So there's the historical, sort of more distant public history piece, and then there's the personal memory piece of my family and the family history piece of my extended family throughout the 20th century and their engagement with farming in the South.
And in watching this film, I found that there was an outpouring of love. I mean, you're personally telling your story, but you're also telling the stories of black farmers from past, present, and even the future, talking about what they've had to go through, what they've been through, and what they're still going through in order to maintain and keep their land and continue doing what they do as farmers.
Yes. Yeah.
Sharing your love, that's what you did in this.
Yeah, I mean, I gained a lot of insight in the making of this film. I learned a lot more about my mother's story growing up in the South, about my grandfather, and about how important the land and the farm was to my family, and how it was really responsible for all the opportunities that I had in my lifetime. And there's a way, as a younger person, I just didn't know that there had been all this, that I knew I stood on shoulders. I had no idea, even in my own family, I stood on such tremendous shoulders of people who had sacrificed a great deal for me and for my, just for my mother, and then that ended up being opportunities for me and eventually for my own children. And this really all started with one small black farmer in this small county who understood the value of land and the value of farming and leveraged that for the future of his children.
Okay, we're going to get a moment to go to at least the first 5 minutes off the top of the show to give you an opportunity to see what we're talking about when we say extraordinary, and then we'll share some excerpts as well throughout the Aware program this evening. But in your own words, you were able to win an award. You didn't know that when you were putting this together, but you did. Yeah. So telling your story is obviously something that has touched a lot of people, and in a way that you come out winning an award, but your true reward, as we can see, has been to share your story and to pass down a legacy.
Yes, absolutely. I think Toni Morrison, the author who wrote books like Beloved, and I think actually she was talking about Beloved once in an interview, and she talked about how she felt sort of just overcome with to write this. So she felt sort of that her ancestors were sort of driving her to tell this story in her book. And I really feel that I was very fortunate. I love this film. This was the first feature-length documentary film I'd ever made. It went on. It did extremely well, and it was definitely something that required a lot of love, a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of energy, and I committed probably 5 years of my life to making this film, and it definitely felt like something bigger than me. Like when I was making it, I definitely felt like there was just, I had this sort of obligation to not just my own family, to all the families, African-American families in the South that had toiled on land, on farms, and had lost those farms, and that legacy of all those people that come before me. And I hope I did justice to it. It was definitely, I did my very best, and I was very proud of the work when I was done.
And then speaking of that work, we're getting ready to show at least the first 5 minutes of it, but I want to give you an opportunity in your own words to set up what we're about to see in this extraordinary documentary.
So this is just the opening I think we're going to see, where I am sort of setting up the context for the film. So I'm letting viewers know that this is going to be a little bit of a different kind of documentary. It's not going to be just somebody sitting in front of a stack of books talking about historical dates. And so this is where I show that we're going to be talking about the history of African American farmers. We're also going to be talking about my own family history in this one county in Georgia, and we're also going to be talking about my personal perspective on it as the filmmaker, who's also you see in front of the camera different parts of the story. So this beginning segment just sets up those different levels of storytelling.
All right, here we have it. Charlene Gilbert, professor, producer, filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker, that is, with her award-winning documentary here highlighted on The Aware Show. And the name of this, once again, is Homecoming. Sometimes I'm haunted by memories of red dirt and clay. Here it is.
Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality.
There are about 9 million Negroes in our southern states, and the majority of them live on farms. While many of these farmers have achieved independence and perhaps prosperity, all too many barely make a living.
In 1910, black farmers owned 15 million acres of land. Since that time, the 15 million have been reduced to 4 million acres. The future, 1984, will mark the black race as a landless people.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by the National Black Programming Consortium, the Open Society Institute, the Waterman Fund of the Philadelphia Foundation, the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, the Funding Exchange, and the Blum-Kovler Foundation.
This is paying off so that we won't be in the streets or whatever. And it's also renewing our heritage, because our ancestors and our grandparents and our parents also had to do this.
These are my cousins, Verna and Jessica. They're doing what I did when I was about their age, except I didn't use words like ancestors back then, and I think I was feeling more like Jessica, dreading every moment I spent in that hot sun.
For the land, for the land, homecoming. For the land, for the land, for the land, homecoming.
By all assessments and evaluations, the achievement of black people by 1910 in their ownership of just over 15 million acres of land is remarkable. Historians tell a story of the late 19th century's Reconstruction as one of betrayal, tragedy, disappointment for black people, but also a period of time of aspiration and hope, and a period of time of hard work.
Dear sir, in September 1847, I arrived. He stated that the Akfus County and the Tuckabatchas had become indignant in consequence of the sale of much of the Creek territory, which General McIntosh had made with the Georgians, and they had determined to make him answer for his treachery by the forfeiture of his land. I had determined to kill McIntosh in his own yard, in the presence of his family, and to let his blood run upon the soil of that reservation which the Georgians had secured to him in the treaty which he had made with them. They frequently shouted with much exultation, "McIntosh, We have come. We have come. We told you. If you sold the land to the Georgians, we would come.
Now, is this hard work, lady? Yes, very hard. Not really. It's not really hard. You just have to condition your mind to want to do it. Because, you know, it gets hot out here, and you really don't want to do it. But if you condition your mind, it's nothing to it, really. Jessica, is your mind conditioned yet? Yes. It just gets really hot, like she said.
I don't think I want their minds to be conditioned for anything. But Verna's right. 100 years ago, a 6-year-old ancestor of hers and mine worked in the hot sun on days like this, from sunup to sundown.
I always like to start with the end of the Civil War, when 4 million African Americans were freed. And then you go through some bitter years of Reconstruction and the populist movement, and then all these segregation laws. And still, when you get up to 1910, there were 200,000 African Americans who had bought land that they farmed. And that's just a remarkable record, considering that during slavery, people weren't allowed to learn to read and write. But they learned a lot about farming, and they utilized that once they were free.
This is my cousin, Warren James. Warren works long days in hot weather by choice. Warren is a farmer, one of only 18,000 black farmers left in this country, down from a high of nearly 1 million in 1910. Warren farms here in Montezuma, Georgia, the only place I know where most people I meet are related to me by either blood or marriage. When people ask me where I'm from, Montezuma, Georgia is the only thing that comes to mind, even though I've never lived here longer than a few weeks until I began this film. This is the story of my family. This is the story of black farmers in the 20th century. This is a story of land and love.
There's a lot to be learned by watching this award-winning documentary in its totality. But from the first 5 minutes of what we've seen, tell us a little bit about what we could expect to learn throughout this if we were able to see the entire film.
Well, the focus of the entire film is really just trying to capture what happened in the 20th century. How did we go from 15 million acres of land at the beginning of the 20th century to less than 4 at the time, you know, towards the end of the 20th century. And really, you know, for me, the question that caught my attention about the story was just thinking about what those early farmers in the early 1900s, what they had come out of. So you're talking about, you know, in a very short window of time between the end of slavery and the beginning of the 20th century, freed Africans who had been enslaved, denied the right to learn to read, write, were being terrorized all throughout the South, had managed to accumulate land and resources it was just a tremendous accomplishment. And they did it through, as Professor Marsha Darling talks about, a combination of sort of hard work, doing side work and doing other side jobs to support their ability to buy land, support their own farming operations. And so it was an amazing economic accomplishment, and I really wanted to understand what had happened. And so the documentary goes through that. The documentary talks about sort of what happened in the early years, how much land farmers had, black farmers had, and then it starts talking about sort of as we go through the 20th century, how did they begin to lose that land and actually have that land taken from them and those farms taken from them? And what were the forces at work that were responsible for that? And so for that tremendous decline. So I think that the film, if you can see the whole film, you'll see that. But I also didn't want the film to be a sorrow song. I did not want it simply to be the story of loss. So I wanted to also talk about my cousin, who was at the time the film was made, the youngest farmer in Macon County, Georgia, and he was still farming, and he was still working hard and still there, and I wanted that to be a testament to what was possible and a way for younger people to kind of enter into the story. So I think about the film as providing lots of different ways for people to enter into this history. They can enter in from the perspective of sort of understanding what happened in the past and the farmers and the people who sort of made all this possible. They can enter into it from the perspective of my cousin, who's a contemporary farmer, farming right now, still sort of doing this work as a younger person. person, or they can enter it from the perspective of me as someone who was born in the South but never really lived in the South, had left the South, was living in mostly urban areas in the Northeast part of the country, but still had this really powerful connection to the South. And so I thought there are lots of different ways people can enter into the story, and I was trying to sort of tell the history, but tell it using a bunch of different lenses, hopefully to kind of make it a more full and sort of rounded out historical profile of this topic.
And that's why we wanted to have you here on The Aware Show, to do this profile with you, to talk about these things, because it is very layered and it does touch all of us in one way or the other without us even realizing it. Yeah. And the extinction, or so it seems, of the Black farmer. And by you actually being able to document this story, your love, your life, your family story, you're kind of holding on to that for us to be able to see it through your eyes and through your family. Job well done. You don't need me to say it because you've already done, but I'm just saying.
I appreciate it always.
Yeah, absolutely. You also carefully chose some of the people whom you wanted to speak in the documentary as sort of like your experts. I mean, you've mentioned already Marsha Darling, who's with Georgetown University. You also had Pete Daniels, who's an author of Breaking the Land and that sort of thing. So there was thought put into that as well. Yeah. Tell us about it.
So the backbone of the film was a pretty familiar format in terms of an historical documentary. So I found experts who had done research on African American farmers, on land loss, and were involved throughout, had different connections. And so there were academics, but there are also people who are involved in social organizations that have been working on behalf of African American farmers, including Ralph Page, who's I think he's still the executive director of the Federation of Southern Land Cooperatives, and the, what was the gentleman's name? A representative from a group that had done a lot to help Black farmers in the 60s and done some initial research. And so so that was one piece of the documentary where we're using kind of experts to talk about it. One of the things I did a little differently than I think you would have seen in a traditional documentary is that I took a lot of those experts and I put them out on the land to do the interviews. So almost all of them are interviewed actually on a road that's in Montezuma, Georgia, actually in Macon County, a road that is also at the time a road that's sort of at a crossroads, because it's like this paved road that if you look into the background of the shot, you'll see the paved road goes into an unpaved sort of red path road going further back into the horizon. And so for me, that was a metaphor in just the setting that I put these experts. So I took them out of where you might think of seeing them traditionally, and I put them right there, literally and figuratively, at the crossroads, and had them talking about this official sort of historical record. And then I took the layer of talking with people who actually lived that history. So, there are the people who studied it in books and are very smart and very well informed. There are the people who worked in organizations to try and help African American farmers. But then I was able to use the voices of actual farmers who were farming and living through this on a day-to-day basis. And I also was able to use the generational memory of my own family, because my cousin was a contemporary farmer, but I also interviewed my great uncle who could talk about his memories of farming as a young man in the 1930s, and he's one of the two oldest living people in my family. And so we have the story, we have the experiences of farmers, African American farmers, also layered in the film, and then using all the archival images. I did a lot of archival research. I went to archives all over the country. Actually, I was in Jackson, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, D.C., looking for and New York, looking for images of African American farmers and looking for archival information. I also wove that into the story, and that became, in some ways, the archival images became a placeholder for the missing voices, the voices of the people who had died, who weren't there. I couldn't interview anyone from 1845, but I had their images, and so I used the images, and sometimes I use quotes from oral histories that had been taken early in the 20th century to capture the experience by people who interviewed older people who had endured slavery. And so I found some of those quotes and used that to try to infuse it with not only the contemporary voices, but also those past voices that had been lost to us, but we had some record of. And so the combination of all those things are some of the elements of the film, and those are some of the different voices in the film.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about the extinction of the black farmer, and we look at the decline, where we were 1 million farmers in the 1920s and now 18,000, and hopefully climbing and not continuing to decline, a lot of issues along the way they had to face.
Yeah.
So very importantly, it is having you to actually document this, but you've probably learned a lot about some of the issues that we wouldn't know, just laymen, about some of the problems and the issues that they faced.
Yeah. I think I learned a tremendous amount about how this all happened. And so the challenges were many, unfortunately, but some of the major ones, there's a quote where one of the gentlemen is talking about how African-American farmers lost land through illegal ways, but then also ways that were sort of quasi-legal, sort of chicanery, where they were sort of tricked into things. So people would be, there are stories, I was told, someone wanted a farmer's land, they would send the farmer a notice and tell him, or someone would come by and say, they're going to be auctioning off your farm next Sunday. If you don't have all this money together, next Saturday, your farm's there's going to be an auction. They're coming. And a lot of farmers would just panic and not know what they could do. And that would often end sadly for farmers. One farmer, took his own life because he thought his farm was about to be taken from him. Other stories of bankers and lawyers colluding to take land from a farmer. Things where they would, sometimes there was this thing where you could go and pay, someone owed taxes, you could pay the taxes for them. So maybe the person doesn't get any notice that they have back taxes. Someone's been paying your taxes on some land for 5 years, then they can go and make a claim on the land. So that was another strategy. It wasn't that it was illegal, but it was certainly not, it was certainly done for ill motives.
You have an uncle even in the documentary who even says that what happened to him was meant to give him a heart attack.
Yeah.
To take his land.
They were trying to take his land, yeah. And so those were, so those, and then some of the other things regarding the USDA were farming is very labor intensive, but also very dependent upon weather and the time of the year. So you have to plant during a certain window. So one strategy that was used often to undermine black farmer success was a black farmer would go to the local USDA office to get, the local FHA office, Farm Bureau office, to get, say, the paperwork to fill out a loan to get an operating loan, which is fairly standard. Well, one farmer talked about going, and every time he went, he was told, come back next Tuesday. Come back next Tuesday. Come back next week. We're all out of the forms, so we don't have any more applications. Come back next week. Well, by the time by the time they actually make the applications available, well, the planting season has gone. You've missed the planting window, so they're not going to be able to plant. And so those are the kind of things that sometimes people ask, like, did they not give them the application? Yeah, they gave them the application. They gave them the application, a month after they knew it would be helpful to them. A white farmer would go in and just get an application. There would never be, so they wouldn't send them away. But the African-American farmers, they would send away and say, we're all out. So things like that. So not providing the kinds of resources that were being provided for other farmers, for African-American farmers, so that they could succeed. Not being able to get equipment that you needed, the big equipment that maybe you don't own but you rent. And there were people who wouldn't rent them the equipment that they needed to do their work.
There are even stories that if farmers even went to vote, and white people found out about it, they would do things to manipulate those sorts of things and to undermine them as well. I mean, the stories can go on and on that would be best told by those who are no longer with us, but thank goodness they have someone like you, Charlene, who's able to tell their stories.
Well, you know, I think I captured some of it, and there's a lot of it in the film, and I hope that this is part of a document that's part of sort of the testament to what we experienced going forward. I think it's easy to forget sometimes. You know, I think now in the 21st century, some people think, well, things seem to be going well, we seem to be doing okay, and sometimes it's good to remember how much we have gone through to get to where we are today.
And bringing us a little bit to today, a $2 billion plus settlement was supposedly reached by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and that sort of thing to try to go back and make right some of the things that had been done, I guess, to farmers. You know the history best about how even that was probably at some point there were some issues that farmers still didn't get some of what was supposed to come to them.
Well, I think the important thing is to know about that is that it only covered the period of 1983 to 1997. So it was a very specific window of time, and I think there was an extension of the time for the second settlement, extended the time that farmers had to apply, so they could I think it was 2012 they extended it to. But there were a whole lot of farmers who were denied access, resources, had their land stolen, taken between like 1910 and 1980. So we still have many, many decades of injustice and of many, many decades of African-American farms being taken that we haven't accounted for. There's been no accounting for that. So I'm glad. I think the settlement is one of the largest civil rights discrimination lawsuit settlements in the history of our country, and it's tremendous. I think that the National Black Farmers Association, John Boyd, who's the head of that, they did a fantastic job of being advocates for African-American farmers and really pushing this, and it's so amazing. But I do think it's worth saying that there's still much to be done to account for all that was taken from us in the 20th century.
You have your cousin in this documentary, Warren, whom I love so dearly.
Yeah.
You just can't help but to watch this, and these people become your family. So I feel like he's my cousin, cousin Warren, who's working the land and that sort of thing. He's starting his mornings, 6, 7 early in the morning, and he's ending. You can see the lights on the tractor late at night in the field. He doesn't know whether he's going to have time to have lunch in the field or whether he's going to be able to go back to the house. I mean, you've got a lot going on because he's working against Mother Nature. He's working, with a lot of things. He's got to work with it, and he can't work against it. And you have to know those kinds of things. So there are a lot of things that are also just nature itself that they have to work with in being farmers. There's a lot to this. It's multi-layered, as you're saying. And even at one point where equipment breaks down and you can't get the equipment for 4 days, and that's this day and time when there's not the discrimination isn't so much a factor as it is time itself and getting what you need and still being able to do it. You've got rain, if it comes at the wrong time, if it comes too much and that sort of thing. But yet he's still doing what his generation has handed down to him to do. And you can tell he does it with a labor of love. And even his wife chiming in, being a wife of a farmer that she never expected to be, but there she is, and being there to support him and his family, and thus your family and all. You are at some point farming too in your little area, and so you probably are realizing what it's taking to even do it even in your little niche of life.
I wish I'd done it better. I was living in Philadelphia when I made this film, and so one of the storylines in the film is the story of me starting my, urban gardening was very popular in Philadelphia, and actually the urban garden plot area in my neighborhood, there was like a waiting list to get a plot in there. So I got on the waiting list, I got my little 10 by 10 plot, and I was working on that while I was also making the film in Georgia, so I'm going back and forth. And it was really interesting for me to think about how in the North, a 10 by 10 plot in an urban neighborhood is like this highly valued commodity where, everyone's doing it now, and it's this sort of like this hip thing to do. And again, there's people are on waiting list to try and get a plot, and I'm working my little 10 by 10 plot, and Warren's working hundreds of acres of land, and but it was I thought it was important to just show again how this isn't a sorrow song. and you have Warren doing what he does in Georgia.
As a labor of love.
And even though I'm not in Georgia, I am engaged. And one of the things also that piece of the film I think was inspired by the fact that I noticed that a lot of my mother and all of her brothers and sisters who left the South were living in urban areas. They always had gardens. And so I grew up taking so much of this for granted. So I just thought, well, everybody has a garden in the backyard. And so my mother always had a garden, and it was always, my parents had the most amazing gardens. It seemed like they could grow anything. And I had an uncle, him and his best friend, that were in Rochester, New York. And I went there. We had a family reunion, and we went to their house, one of the houses after like one of the days of the reunion. And I walked into his backyard, and he didn't just have like a garden. It was like a half an acre. And it was like everything was like beautiful and rich and green and lush. And this is in Rochester, New York, where it's very cold. And I thought it was almost magical, because I thought, how did you grow all this stuff here?
Green thumb.
It's like, it was magical. And I just thought about how they brought that with them, that, we worked this land for over 200 years. We knew something about how to make things grow. And I think that knowledge is in us, and was carried with many of us when they left the South, and they, wherever they ended up, again, my parents, they would plant and they would grow these amazing things. And so I wish I had paid more attention as a kid, so I could be better at it.
Because I heard in the film someone say they wouldn't have hired you.
No, my mother.
So I wasn't gonna say it was your mama.
Oh yeah,
but your mama said,
my mama
no,
said,
I wouldn't
hire you, girl. So I wish I listened better, but it's never too late. And I'm also trying to teach my kids. My mom lives with us. My mom lives in the same town I live in now, and so I'm hoping this spring she's going to teach my daughters how to start a garden. So
wonderful.
It's important knowledge.
Oh, you take a lot of what you learn growing up and going back and doing this documentary. You take it personal and professional about education, because you're a dean at the university, and so these things go hand in hand, and the love of land. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then we're going to go to another excerpt of your film.
I was thinking the other day about the connection between I started my career as a documentary filmmaker, and I still do that, but I'm now in higher education administration. So I actually am the dean of a college at Ohio State University, dean of the Lima campus, actually. And so I was thinking about how this work feels as much like a passion for me as my filmmaking work does, and I was thinking about why that is. And I realized that there's a real direct line from kind of the documentary on homecoming, learning about how much it took for my grandfather to be able to get my mother to college. My grandfather wanted to give every one of his children the opportunity to go to college. He put up his land as collateral to get the money to be able to send them to college. And given how important his land was to him, I knew what a big deal that was. Like that, this is like giving everything you have in the world for something. And he was willing to do that for education. And so I think what it really speaks to for me is how important education has been for African Americans in the 20th century to open up doors and opportunities for us, and how critically important it is now and going forward for us to continue to remember that education is absolutely the key to our future. And so in my position as a dean, I get to do that work. I get to make sure we are creating pathways and opportunities for young people to get an education and to get opportunities. And so I see the connection. So I don't get to make as many films as I like to, but I continue to get to do the work that I think is important.
And so the really wonderful thing about this, Dr. Gilbert, is that you get a chance to educate your children, or I should say your students, about the love of land and the importance of land. And you do that in such a way that they understand the importance of education and owning land. Tell us a little bit about where you, in being an educator and that sort of thing, how that was, you mentioned how it was important to your family and that sort of thing, but can you tell us a little bit why that's still important to us?
One of the things I do is I really try to communicate it to you said my children. I have two beautiful children, and I really want them to learn how to grow things and to grow their own food and to understand where food comes from and to really appreciate the people, the farmers who provide that for us, and then we just go to the grocery store. So I don't want them ever to take that for granted. I also want them to understand the legacy of their family. They'll understand the legacy of their great-grandfather, my grandfather, their grandmother, my mother, and how important education was and how we did not always have opportunities for education and how we had to really fight for the right to be educated, how we had to make huge sacrifices to be able to go to college. And so I want them to understand that so that they never take that for granted and that they never forget. So that's really important to me for my own children and my own family. In terms of being a dean, I feel that the work that I do, I have as much passion now about advocating for education as I did when I was making this documentary film and trying to sort of make sure people understood the history of African American farmers and land laws and the role of black farmers in our community. So I feel like it's all really connected. I'm just doing a different chapter of the work now, making sure that young people in my community have access to higher education, know how to access it without going into debt, know how to have career paths and know how to make sure that they're prepared for the kinds of jobs that they're going to be in the 21st century. And knowing that this is an investment in themselves. And one of the things that my mother used to say to me was about the importance of education. She said, you know, honey, my mother and father would tell us this, you know, the one thing they can't take from you is what you have up here in your head. And so I think that a lot of looking back on it again, there's so many things I learned in the making of this film that put my mother in context. So she used to say that to us as a kid all the time. I never knew this other part of the history, right? So knowing after making this documentary and understanding what happened all to African American farmers throughout the 20th century, I understand what she was really telling me was really out of those experiences, out of the experience of seeing farmers lose their land, seeing people take the land of farmers, seeing people, you know, just creeping up on them a little bit every year, taking a little one more acre.
And how much of that actually probably had to do with not being educated and not knowing any better.
Yeah.
And I think at one point, even in the documentary, in fact, I know it was very profound to even hear it be said, even though a lot of things were said back in those times, that it wasn't important for a Negro to get an education, that they could just work the fields and work the farms and that sort of thing. Yeah. Well, there's an importance in having an education and still having the land and work the field.
Exactly.
And I think that's what you try to teach and pass along.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and set up the next part of this documentary here that you've done, and I'll let you do it in your own words.
So this is the continuation of that opening clip, right?
Right.
That's the one. So the next part we're going to see is just so you saw the opening of the film at the beginning, at the top of the show. This part, it just goes a little further in, and this is where you're going to see more of the pieces of the story, the different, you know, there are essentially 3 stories going on in the documentary. There's like the official history, the family testimony, and then of the farmers, and then my own personal engagement with the story. So in this next section, you're going to see all those pieces kind of playing off of each other. So there's the part of me working my urban garden in Philadelphia with my mom, helping me and explaining things to me as we go. And then there's Marsha Darling, the professor, talking about the economic history and how the impact of the Depression years on farmers and how just the fall in the overall economy also impacted black farmers considerably. And then there's the testimony of my great uncle who talks about being a farmer in the 1930s and his experiences living through that era. And so all those pieces come together in this next section.
All right, you're watching an Aware Profile with Professor Charlene Gilbert and this award-winning producer herself winning an award with this, and we wanted to share it with you on The Aware Show, an extraordinary documentary called Homecoming. Sometimes I'm haunted by memories of red dirt and clay. Take a look and a listen.
The Civil War, of course, the end of the Civil War, opened the possibility with the black agenda of 40 acres and a mule, literacy, and the franchise, it opened the possibility of some land reform program. And there were basically 2 efforts. General Sherman's Field Order number 15, deeding land over to blacks on the Georgia and South Carolina coast, and the Southern Homestead Act, which set aside 45 million acres of land in the southern states for freedmen and for refugees. However, unfortunately, most of that land never did get into the hands of black people.
General, we want homesteads. We were promised homesteads by the government. We are left in a more unpleasant condition than our former. You will see this is not the condition of really free men. You asked us to forgive the landowners of our land. You only lost your right arm in a war and might forgive them. The man who tied me to a tree and gave me 39 lashes and who stripped and flogged my mother and my sister and who combines with others to keep away land from me, knowing I would not have anything to do with him had I land of my own, that man I cannot well forgive. Does it look as if he has forgiven me, seeing how he tries to keep me in a condition of helplessness?
I lived here for 6 months while I made this film. I learned a lot while I was here. I learned that they call this breaking the land. I learned that cotton seeds are blue, that there's a small window of time when you can plant, that a breakdown or one delay can cost you your crop, that only fools worry about the weather, and only God knows how this day will end.
The land preparation will consist of several trips across the field with the harrow, chisel plowing, bedding, and waiting on the season to plant. So if it's the planting season, you would be planting all day, and unless you had a breakdown or something like that.
Unfortunately, we don't have a full rib.
How many ribs you got?
3. On the computer, it said we had 2 full ribs, but undoubtedly, we got back there and looked in stock, and we didn't have any full ribs. They're all 3. They must have been entered on, in inventory or something. I don't have a new tire like that. I can have you one here in
10 minutes.
I wished I could. Bad as I hate it.
You can have it in the morning. Okay.
Get it here tomorrow.
Okay, we'll do that.
When Warren went back to the tire shop, they told him it would be 4 days before they could get him a new tire. Warren didn't have 4 days, but he had family, and they found him a tire.
This process of black people working to acquire this equity base, it seems to me, is one of the greatest economic achievements of the early 20th century, all the more because by 1910, almost every single southern state had politically disfranchised black male voters who had been given the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. There were a number of ways in which black people acquired land, but in almost all cases was really the result of a lot of hard work and saving money and often taking jobs other than farming in the off-farming season, in the turpentine industry, steel industry, or other industries in the South, jobs that tended to bring cash wages. So there were a number of ways that black people acquired land, but basically hard work and perseverance.
100 years later, black farmers are still relying on off-farm work to make their crops. The average black farmer makes $15,000 from farm income. Warren supplements his income by hauling chicken litter, which is in high demand as a natural fertilizer. Hauling and spreading chicken litter can be pretty miserable work. The day after Warren spread this litter, Peanut, his helper, quit. I think my assistant almost quit too. When I was 5, my family left the South. My mother went home to Montezuma to say goodbye. I don't remember anyone telling me we were going or how long we would be, but I do remember playing in the dirt out by the barn. I remember making mud pies and begging my grandmother for a fresh egg, a key ingredient to any good mud pie. When they called me, I scooped up all the dirt I could pack and took it with me to the car. I don't think my mother found the dirt until long after we had gone. I'm sure she threw it out and never thought twice about it. I, on the other hand, think about that red dirt every time I look down at my feet.
Turn the dirt over. All right, now. You got to go a little down. Push it all the way down. All the way? A little further down. Now pick it up and turn it over.
People used to do this with acres of things. I'm tired now.
Again, all the way over. Down. Good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Good. And that's good. That's called breaking up the soil, tilting the soil, you know, turning the soil over. About 3 different names for the same thing.
And how many times do you do this before it's ready?
It's going to be ready when we get through. We're going to rake it. And get all the roots out of it and make it smooth.
And then I do it back this other way.
All the way across again.
Okay. I'm getting good at it? Oh, good. Would you hire me?
No, I wouldn't.
I'm your daughter.
That's why I wouldn't hire you. I know you're my daughter.
People that I've talked with in the South suggest that the Depression started happening in the South long before an official stock market crash. We know that 30 independent black banks failed in this decade. What's important about all of these banks, one, they represented deposits by black depositors. These were basically the life savings of many black people. Two, these were the only banks essentially in the country and in the South particularly that provided operating loans to black farmers. And so the process of the cotton market bottoming out between 1920 and 1930 devastated the ability of black farmers to repay their operating loans, and that in turn crippled the banks.
When Hoover was president, those years was tough with him. And everything went to the bottom. And when I say that, I mean no money, no nothing. Everybody was driving cars, Brexley. The biggest of the black people had to jack them up. They wasn't able to continue to operate them. And they would go to church with shoes tied up with strings and wire sold to the top of their shoe because they didn't have any.
This is the decade of foreclosures, duress sales, tax sales, the serious inability to recover from economic recession. And so this is a decade in which some numbers of the people who migrate to southern cities and towns and northern cities are people who can't otherwise make it and who have been just adversely affected by the economic circumstances. And again, while it's hard for everybody, black and white, who are poor, it was much more difficult for black farmers.
You're watching The Aware Show, and we were just highlighting just a small excerpt of Charlene Gilbert's award-winning documentary that she did as a labor of love. And again, as we watch that, we just feel like this is our family too. Such great archival history that you were able to use in all of this to tell your story. What's your strategy of all of this?
Well, one of my favorite things is doing archival research. So part of making the documentary is you spend I spent a good probably year and a half or more doing the research for the film, and part of that research was looking for not just the historical information, but also looking for archival imagery, photographs, film footage, anything I could find. And I went to archives. I went to the Schomburg Archive in New York. I went to the archive at Tulane in New Orleans. I went to the State Archives in Jackson, Mississippi. I went to the Georgia Archives. I went to archives at Tuskegee. So I went to a lot of different places, and obviously the Library of Congress and archives in other museums, the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. So I was able to go lots of places, and I was looking for these kind of images to help tell the story. And I was just very fortunate and worked with some really good people who also helped me find the images to complement the story.
Now we see why you don't have the time to.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
We'll talk about upcoming projects for you, but before we do that, I want to get an opportunity to talk about where Warren and family, where they are now. What are they doing?
So Warren and Tina are still in Montezuma, Georgia. Warren is still farming. He farms more land now than he did before. One of the things that has happened is that some of the farmers that were in the film were older when I made the film, and since then have retired or stepped aside. And often when they do that, Warren has been able to pick up some of the responsibilities for his dad and for his uncle. So, and I think that I still wonder what's going to happen next, because there are still, fewer and fewer young people who are going into farming, although there's a report that since 2007 we've seen an uptick in numbers of black farms and black farmers, so I think that's really great news, and I'm hoping that we keep seeing that trajectory nationally, that more people are going into farming, more African Americans are going into farming, because I think that's really important. So, hopefully we will continue to see people holding on to land that they have, and even considering, small business opportunities as farmers.
And even learning more. Our producer, Dr. Gail Frazier, and myself, in watching this, in prepping for our interview with you, she said something, it's funny, but it's not funny, because I felt the same thing when I saw this, was I didn't even know that cottonseed was blue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's like a whole thing there with just being educated about some of the smallest things that we don't even think about until we see it in something like what you've done with this documentary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just makes you realize how uneducated you really are. Not that you need to know the color of it, but I'm just saying, just very basic things about the things we live with and use every day.
Yeah,
Cotton.
absolutely.
We don't have a clue about where it comes from, what it looks like, or anything sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it just having that, and just hearing that and thinking about it lets you know that there needs to be an awakening, an awareness, an understanding of just some basic things. I think you do that. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you about is, in looking at your documentary, you give that past, that present, that contemporary feel to how this touches everyone, even today.
Yeah.
And so, where will we see you in the future? You say, we know that you're a dean at the Ohio and University, and we know that you're very busy. We know that you're an award-winning producer with this particular project. People need to see more of what you have to say about educating us.
Yeah. Right now in this moment, I'm busy raising kids and working in administration, but I do have 2 projects that I'm looking at that I'm going to be trying to develop I use my summers for research and for working on projects when I can. And so one of the areas that I'm interested in is looking at sort of maybe a postscript to this documentary. So I'm sort of interested in going back to Montezuma to capture what's going on now, so sort of an update, because there's also been a sort of a demographic shift now. For example, my grandfather's farm home was sold, and a Mexican-American family bought that farm, and they're now living there, doing a lot of the same things that me and my mother went by and met them, and they're traveling the same path my grandparents traveled. So they are, they have a large family like my grandfather had, and they are working hard and trying to create opportunities, in pursuit of the American dream like we pursued it. And so it's just the next chapter. So I'm kind of interested in looking at possibly going back to do something like that, where we talk about sort of what's going on now.
In the meantime, you share a great deal of, I would say, labor of love in telling your story and going around and speaking and letting people know about the plight of the black farmer, past, present, and future. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's one of the ways that I believe that you're able to continue to educate people.
Well, I go wherever I'm invited to go, if I can. My schedule's really, it's a little harder now, but whenever I can, I do try to go out and talk with the film. The film has sort of a life of its own, so the film gets screened in lots of places, and I hear about the screening, so it always makes me very happy. And then occasionally I get to come with the film and talk with, I have to screen the film and then actually talk with audiences afterwards. So I'm hoping that the film itself is doing that work, and I think it is. I think it continues to be something that people use in universities and colleges and classes and all kinds of work, and that means a great deal to me, to know that the film is out there in the world doing this work and carrying this message.
And in talking about some of the things that people talk about when they've had an opportunity to screen the film and that sort of thing, what do you find are some of the most common questions or things
one
that
of the
people
most
ask?
common things is people will stand up and talk about their own families. They'll talk about the story of maybe there was a farm in their own family that they lost or that they don't have anymore, or that they know that they have, but they haven't thought about it all, and they didn't really think of it as being that valuable. But now the film makes them think, oh, maybe this is something I need to learn more about. Maybe this is a history I need to learn more about, and maybe I need to make sure we are taking good care of this resource that we took for granted. So I'm always fascinated to hear the stories that people have. I think the fact that I use my family story to tell this history opens the door for other people to add to that, to add to the collective storytelling about how this impacted all of us. And so I'm always fascinated to hear the different ways in which people connect to the film. So.
That's interesting because I too found myself doing the same thing, thinking about my family and the farmland in which some family members still own, and some of the issues and things that they still face in doing that. And actually having talked to one of my uncles and trying to find out some of the challenges and things that he faces, not only the natural things that we talked about earlier in this show, but also he was just telling me even some of the pesticides and the things that are used sometimes to protect the product itself can sometimes be detrimental to the environment. And so in a quest to produce more and faster, then there's also the potential for the extinction of other things, i.e. he asked me, he said, when was the last time you saw a light bug that we used to chase, you know, or how many butterflies do you see, you know, so it's just things that you don't think about, that you don't know how things are. I'm not saying that farmers are don't want to go there, but I'm just saying he was just sharing things like that they see and they know and they pay attention to that we probably don't pay attention to. So they have to find the balance of how to make sure that they're doing the things that they need to do to produce quality product, but also to protect environment. So you're right, it does make you have those conversations with family members and ask, when normally I probably wouldn't even, the farm has just been there in North Carolina and nobody really, you know, thinks about it. We know they have roadside stands in which they do in the summertime and raise money and that sort of thing. And he also told me about the watermelons that he just loads up on the trucks and takes up north and just sells, you know, and makes a lot of money off stuff like that. And I don't ever think about, so that's how they make the farm work. It's things like that. One of the last questions that I want to ask before Aware wraps up is just what would you like for our viewers to know at the end of the day when they see the program?
I think I'd like for the viewers to know that that African Americans in this country have contributed a tremendous amount to the economic accomplishments of this country as a whole, and that those contributions began. You know, they began when we were brought here and forced to. Our labor was extracted from us by force. And so a lot of the stories about the great economic miracle of America are missing a chapter. They're missing the chapter of all that free labor that went into the building up of the wealth of the country. And I think it's also really important for us to always remember and acknowledge how much those freed Africans were able to accomplish in a very short window of time. And I always say to my friends, you know, when I think about what they were able to do, I think, well, then I have to kind of step up my game.
And you're doing it.
So I think that I just want people to remember and build on that legacy.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
No, absolutely. You've been watching an Aware Profile with Charlene Gilbert, joining us here with her award-winning documentary entitled Homecoming. Sometimes I'm haunted by memories of red dirt and clay. For all of us here at The Aware Show, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Dee Dee Sharp saying until the next time, stay informed and stay aware.